Hi, my name is Hannah, and I'm 35 years old. When I look back at my life, the first thing that strikes me is how early I learned that love in a family can be conditional. I grew up in a house where I was always compared to my younger sister Megan. From the very beginning, our parents, Frank and Brenda, made it clear that Megan was the golden child. She was bright, quick-witted, and charming, all the things they wanted in a daughter. Me? I was just the other one, the one they tolerated. I was never enough, no matter how hard I tried. We lived in a multi-generational household, which included not just my parents and Megan, but also my Uncle Peter, my dad's younger brother. Uncle Peter had always lived with us due to his fragile health and inability to hold down a full-time job. He did odd part-time jobs when his body allowed, but most days, he stayed home quietly, helping where he could. My grandparents, who also lived with us, took care of him, and the house felt peaceful back then. Whenever they were around, there was a softness in the air. My dad was civil. My mom laughed more. Uncle Peter smiled more often. But that peaceful bubble shattered when I was just 8 years old. My grandparents were killed in a tragic car accident. The entire family was devastated. Megan and I cried like any children would, and I remember Uncle Peter sitting in a chair in the living room, hunched over, sobbing into his hands. But what still haunts me to this day is my father's reaction. In the middle of the morning, I saw him smirking. It wasn't confusion or shock, it was a smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they realize they've won. I stood frozen, unable to understand why anyone would be happy at a time like this. I was too young to fully grasp the implications then, but that smile settled into my memory like a thorn. At the funeral, I glanced over at him again. While everyone else was mourning quietly, my father had a look of relief. That's the only word I can use now that I'm older. It was as if he had waited for this moment. A release from the quiet authority of his own parents. For me, it marked the end of safety in that home. My Uncle Peter sat beside me during the service, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. His eyes, red and tired, were full of genuine sadness, not just for the loss, but for what he knew was coming. Without the grandparents around, my father's cruelty toward Uncle Peter grew vicious. He no longer tried to hide it. He ridiculed him for being jobless, called him a parasite, and often barked insults like, "You should be grateful we even let you live here." It was hard to hear, especially because I could see the pain it caused Uncle Peter. He became thinner, paler, quieter. One day, I mustered the courage to ask him if he was okay. He smiled weakly and said, "I'm frail, Hannah. Things aren't going well with work. It can't be helped." He never spoke badly about my father, no matter how badly he was treated. Eventually, the inevitable happened. My father kicked him out. I was only a child, but I remember the moment like it happened yesterday. "You're useless. Get out." My father had screamed. Uncle Peter didn't argue. He just stood, gathered his few belongings, and prepared to leave. I ran to him, clinging to his sleeve, begging him not to go. "Don't worry, Hannah," he said, patting my shoulder. "You're strong. You'll be okay." I wasn't okay. I was terrified. "But I'm worried about you," I said, tears running down my face. He gave me one final smile and said softly, "It's okay," before walking out the front door. I remember standing there in silence, my small hand frozen in the air where his used to be. After he left, the house grew colder. Not just in temperature, but in spirit. My father had always been emotionally distant, but now he became ruthless. And with my Uncle Peter gone, I lost the only adult who ever showed me warmth. Megan, of course, was flourishing. My parents poured all their attention into her. She was their pride, their investment. Meanwhile, I was becoming invisible in my own home. I didn't fully understand it then, but that period of my life laid the groundwork for everything that would follow. It taught me how cruelty can hide behind smiles, how silence can be a shield, and how one person's quiet kindness can leave a lifetime of impact. Uncle Peter didn't have money, power, or health. But in that house, he was the only one who ever made me feel seen. When I turned 18, I hoped that maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally begin to treat me like an adult. I had been quietly enduring their comparisons for years, watching them celebrate Megan's every little accomplishment while dismissing mine entirely. If I got a B+, they wondered why it wasn't an A. If Megan got an A, they threw a dinner party. My athletic achievements, volunteer work, and independent spirit were always deemed irrelevant compared to Megan's so-called genius. Then one afternoon, my mother Brenda called me into the living room. My father Frank was already seated with his arms crossed and a strangely satisfied look on his face. Megan was upstairs in her room, probably working on some advanced prep course they had enrolled her in. I remember sitting down slowly, sensing that something was off. Frank leaned forward and said, "We've made a decision. You're 18 now, and you should contribute to this household if you want to keep living here." I was confused. "Contribute how?" I asked. He answered flatly, "Your sister Megan needs proper tutoring to develop her talents. It's not cheap. If you can cover $1,000 each month for her tuition, you can stay. Otherwise, it's time for you to make your own way." I blinked, stunned. Tuition? $1,000? I was still in school, working part-time in a local bookstore on weekends for minimum wage. Where did they expect me to get that kind of money? I protested. "But I can't afford that. I'm still trying to figure things out." Brenda cut me off, her voice laced with disdain. "We've already sacrificed enough. Megan has real potential. You'll survive." Then she handed me a small envelope. Inside were a few crumpled bills, maybe $50 at most. "We've done our part," Frank said coldly. "Now it's your turn. Contact your uncle, or do whatever you need. Just don't expect us to carry dead weight any longer." I didn't say anything. My mouth had gone dry. I stood there, staring at the two people who had raised me, people who now looked at me like a burden. And then they did something that truly broke me. They opened the front door and motioned for me to leave. I walked out, still clutching that pathetic envelope. I turned back once, hoping, praying someone would stop me. But the door closed. Just like that. The final, heavy sound of rejection. I wandered to the train station. I had no plan. I didn't know which train to take. I just knew I needed to find Uncle Peter. My memory guided me as I asked strangers for directions, clutching my small bag and trying to stay composed. The journey was long and unfamiliar, but somehow I made it to his apartment complex. My heart pounded as I pressed the buzzer. When the door opened, there he was. Uncle Peter. Thinner than I remembered and a little older, but his eyes hadn't changed. They still held warmth. He looked surprised at first, then deeply concerned. "Hannah?" he asked. I stepped inside and collapsed into his arms, unable to speak. After a few moments, I finally managed to tell him everything: how my parents had cast me aside, how they demanded I pay for Megan's tuition, how they handed me pocket change and locked the door behind me. Uncle Peter clenched his fists, his frail frame trembling with restrained anger. "What are they doing?" he muttered, almost to himself. I felt ashamed, like I was a failure for being thrown away. But Uncle Peter knelt beside me, placing his large, warm hand on my head just like he used to. "It must have been hard, but don't worry anymore," he said gently. Then, almost hesitantly, he added, "As you know, I'm not well. I don't have much income. I'm poor, Hannah." His voice was laced with sorrow, not for himself, but for not being able to offer more. But then he looked into my eyes and said with quiet determination, "Still, if you don't mind, I want to be your parent. I'd like to be your foster father." I didn't let him finish. I hugged him tightly, tears streaming down my face. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. His chest was similar to my father's in size, but everything about the embrace was different. This was love, real love. Not the transactional kind my parents gave, but something deep and unconditional. "I'll do my best," he whispered. "You don't have to worry about anything anymore." That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. His apartment was small and old, the heater creaked, and the curtains didn't quite close, but I felt safe. I had nothing, but I had the only person who had ever truly loved me. I knew life wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I wasn't alone. Life with Uncle Peter wasn't easy, but it was honest. His apartment was cramped, the wallpaper was peeling, and sometimes the heat barely worked in winter. But in that small space, I found more love and dignity than I ever had in my parents' spacious home. Peter lived modestly, surviving off a small disability stipend and the occasional part-time repair job he could manage when his health allowed. He refused to let me feel guilty about being there, and instead, he encouraged me to stand tall and rebuild my life from the ground up. I enrolled in community college, thanks to a scholarship I applied for secretly before being thrown out. I worked part-time at a grocery store during the evenings and took early morning classes. There were nights when I came home so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but Peter was always waiting up for me, asking how my day went, heating up leftover soup, offering kind words. It was the kind of fatherly care I never knew I needed until I had it. He never compared me to anyone. If I failed a test, he said, "Next time, kiddo." If I passed, he said, "I knew you could." And every single time, he said it with pride in his voice. The days turned into months. Slowly, I began to send him money, small amounts at first. I got a better job at a local design company after graduating with a degree in visual communications. I thought he might use the money to buy better clothes or move to a slightly bigger apartment, but he never spent a dime of it. He continued living the same way, simple, humble, content. When I asked him why, he said, "I never wanted anything more than peace. You gave me that. I don't need anything else." But not all peace lasts forever. 3 years after I moved in with Peter, I received a message from my mother. I hadn't heard from my parents since they kicked me out. The message simply read, "We're hosting a reunion for our closest friends. It's a big event. It would be good if you could help." I don't know what got into me, but a part of me still longed to be accepted, to be seen. So I replied and asked for the details. They sent me the supposed venue and date. I told Uncle Peter, who raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure they really want you there?" he asked, not unkindly, just cautiously. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think I have to go." I used part of my savings to help fund the event. I paid for catering, decorations, music, $3,000 in total, hoping that maybe this time they would see me differently. Maybe this time they'd be grateful. I showed up at the venue early on the day of the reunion, dressed formally, heart pounding. But when I arrived, the building was locked. Empty. Confused, I stood outside in disbelief. Minutes passed, then my phone rang. It was my mother. "Oh, Hannah," she said with a fake sweetness that made my stomach turn. "We forgot to tell you. We changed the location." "Why didn't you inform me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "We didn't think you'd fit in with the crowd. It's just old friends. We didn't want you to feel out of place." And then she hung up. That was the moment I finally let go. All the years I spent trying to prove my worth to people who never valued me, gone in a second. I stood there on the sidewalk, stunned, then slowly walked away. But I didn't walk away defeated. I walked away with purpose. That night, when I told Uncle Peter everything, he didn't say a word. He just handed me a hot cup of tea and sat beside me in silence. That silence said everything. It said, "I'm proud of you. I'm here. You are not them." From that moment forward, I stopped trying to earn my parents' approval. Instead, I started focusing on something else, building a life where I could help others who had been hurt the way I had. I began designing online modules for self-paced learning, teaching emotional intelligence, digital creativity, and self-worth through visual design. What started as a small project quickly grew. I partnered with local organizations, then with national ones. Before I knew it, schools and nonprofits were licensing my content to support vulnerable teens, especially those who felt invisible in their homes. Peter watched all this quietly, never asking for credit, never once saying, "I told you so." He just smiled every time someone wrote a thank you letter or sent me a message saying I'd helped change their life. He'd fold the letters carefully and tuck them into a drawer like keepsakes. My success was never flashy. I didn't buy a mansion or appear in magazines. But I was making a difference, and more importantly, I was at peace. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, not because I was brilliant or perfect, but because I was loved, supported, and allowed to grow. Years passed, and my small online education platform grew beyond what I ever imagined. It started with a few digital courses, then evolved into an entire library of interactive content for underserved youth. I began speaking at community centers, joining webinars, and eventually received funding from national education initiatives. The recognition was humbling, but every time someone praised me, I thought of Peter. None of this would have been possible without him. Then one day, out of the blue, there was a knock at my apartment door. I opened it, and there stood my parents, Frank and Brenda. They looked older than I remembered. My father's once thick black hair was now almost gone, and my mother's eyes had lost that sharpness I remembered from my childhood. She looked worn. My immediate reaction wasn't anger, it was confusion. I hadn't heard from them since the reunion betrayal. What were they doing here? Hannah, my father said, with a thin smile, have you been well? I didn't answer right away. I stepped out, closed the door halfway behind me, and crossed my arms. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice firm. My mother tried to smile. Let's put the past behind us. We're family after all. It's time to reconnect. I scoffed. Reconnect? You left me at 18 with $50 and no place to live. I think we're long past reconnecting. My father's expression changed quickly. The artificial warmth evaporated. You always had an attitude problem, he muttered. Still stubborn. Some things never change. He tried to step forward. I blocked the doorway. I'm busy. Please go home, I said. Brenda spoke up again. Come now, don't be cold. This place you live in, it's so small. You must be struggling. Let us help. You have nothing to do with this life, I said. You forfeited your role in it the day you kicked me out. They tried pushing past me. For people their age, they were surprisingly forceful. We scuffled for a moment at the doorway, two aging parents trying to squeeze their way into a life they'd rejected. My father managed to get a foot past the threshold, and that's when I pushed back, hard. They both stumbled and landed on the hallway floor. It wasn't violent, but it was symbolic. I stood over them and finally said what I had carried in my heart for years. You're so annoying. What part of go home don't you understand? Is that any way to speak to your parents? My father barked. You stopped being my parents the day you chose Megan over me. I shot back. They staggered to their feet, rubbing their backs and brushing off the embarrassment. My father tried to sound dignified, but it came off bitter. We raised you for 18 years. No, I corrected. The only years I felt love were when my grandparents were alive. The rest of the time, I was a ghost in your house. Frank looked uncomfortable. Megan was supposed to take care of us, he muttered. What happened? Asked flatly. Did your perfect daughter abandon you too? They hesitated. Then Brenda sighed. She became a lawyer. Past the bar. Everything was fine until she left a note and disappeared. Said she won't be taking care of us. A long silence passed. Well, that's surprising, I said, not hiding my sarcasm. Maybe she got tired of being your investment instead of your daughter. Frank's jaw clenched. We gave her everything. And forgot to give her love, I added. Then the truth came out. Their company had shut down. They'd lost their jobs, burned through what remained of the inheritance, and now they were broke. With no support system, no savings, and no one to turn to, they came to me, their discarded daughter, as a last resort. That's why we're here, Frank admitted finally. We need help. We want you to take care of us. I stood in silence for a moment before replying. No. Their faces froze. No, my mother repeated. You heard me. The only real parent I've ever had is Peter. He's the one who took care of me. He's the one I call Dad. Frank stepped forward again, this time not as aggressively, but with a touch of desperation. So what? He raised you better than we did? Yes, I said plainly. He had nothing, but he gave me everything that matters. My words hung in the air like a final verdict. My parents looked as if someone had slapped them. They were quiet now, their bodies deflated from the weight of their own choices. The confident, dismissive Frank and sharp-tongued Brenda were gone. All that remained were two people who had finally realized the consequences of the life they built, and the daughter they threw away. They didn't leave right away. They stood there awkwardly for a few more seconds, hoping I would soften, that I'd suddenly change my mind and say, "Come in." But I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was, holding the door half shut, creating a wall that neither of them could cross. Not anymore. Eventually, Frank asked quietly, "So you really have a job? A real one?" The disbelief in his voice was insulting. "Well, kind of," I said, casually shrugging. "I run a company." Brenda perked up. "Oh, what kind of company?" "A digital learning platform," I replied. "I design emotional development programs for youth who feel ignored and underappreciated, like I once did." Frank narrowed his eyes. "So, you're doing well then? Making good money?" "I'm doing fine," I said flatly. "But not because of you." Suddenly, he reached out and gripped my shoulder. I instantly pulled away. "Let go of me," I demanded. But he kept going, his voice taking on that condescending tone I remembered too well. "You're angry. I get it. You're hurt because only Megan got attention, right? But deep down, aren't you glad to see us again?" I looked at him like he was a stranger. "Stop making up your own story. I'm not glad. I haven't thought about either of you in 15 years, except to remind myself how not to be." Brenda tried one more time. "Don't worry. From now on, we'll be real parents. We'll be there for you." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not out of joy, out of complete disbelief. "You think you can just say that and undo everything? That I'll forget how you threw me away when I was 18 because I couldn't pay for Megan's future?" Frank's expression stiffened, but he didn't argue. Brenda's smile was gone now, replaced with the pale flush of embarrassment. They didn't expect this version of me, the one who didn't need them, didn't fear them, and certainly didn't pity them. Then I added, "I got a scholarship. I graduated. I got hired by a large company. And through that, I built something that matters, not just to me, but to others." My mother's eyebrows lifted slightly, and for a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes that looked like pride, though it was likely just surprise. "That's wonderful," she said quickly. "And your husband? We should meet him." "You won't," I said. "He's overseas right now." "And Peter?" Frank asked. "Isn't he the one who took care of you? What happened to him?" I smiled. "He's overseas too. I thought you knew I was living here alone. You assumed he was dead, didn't you?" They didn't respond. "He got offered a new opportunity. Somewhere with clean air and good healthcare access. He deserved that." "You have children too?" Brenda asked slowly. "Yes. A boy and a girl. They adore Peter. They call him Grandpa." Their faces tightened. I could see the pain on their faces, not because they cared, but because they realized just how far they had been excluded from my life, and how full my life had become without them. "Well, in that case, we could come too," Frank said. "We could move overseas and be together again. One family." "You're welcome to move wherever you want," I said plainly. "But you won't be living with me, and I won't be taking care of you. You're on your own now, just like you left me." Frank's mouth hung open in disbelief. "Are you really abandoning us?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "You abandoned me a long time ago. I just finally learned how to live with it." They had no response. They simply stood there, stunned by the truth they'd tried to outrun. "And don't worry about Peter," I added. "The money I used to send him? He never spent it. He continued living in that same old apartment until we convinced him to come live with us abroad. I'm just here finalizing the paperwork." Brenda's voice cracked. "So, you're really leaving? Leaving us behind?" I nodded. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "For what?" Frank asked, confused. "For abandoning me when you did. Because of you, I found real love, real strength, and I built a life I'm proud of." I closed the door, turned the lock, and walked back inside. It felt like the final chapter had turned itself. That unfinished ache I'd carried since I was a teenager was gone. All that was left was peace. I left that apartment the very next day, not out of fear that my parents would return, but because my new life was waiting for me thousands of miles away. The moment I stepped onto the plane, I felt something deep inside release. Not just a physical distance from my past, but an emotional separation from everything I'd once tried so hard to hold on to. I wasn't running away, I was finally moving forward. Life overseas was something I'd never dreamed of when I was younger. I had a husband who respected me, 2 children who filled my days with laughter, and most importantly, I had Peter. He was skeptical at first about leaving his old apartment behind. "I've never even had a passport," he grumbled one morning, sipping tea while reading about the move. "And your father would call me a parasite for leaving the country before him." "You're not a parasite," I told him firmly. "You're the reason I have a life at all." In the end, Peter agreed. And it was the best decision we ever made. Our new home wasn't a mansion, but it had everything we needed: open air, natural light, and space for Peter to plant vegetables with the kids in the garden. He took up walking in the mornings, sometimes with our son, sometimes alone. His health improved steadily. He even enrolled in a language class just for fun. "It's never too late to learn something new," he said with a wink. The kids adored him. They called him Grandpa, drew him pictures, and listened wide-eyed to the stories he told about back in the day. I sometimes caught him watching them with teary eyes. "I never thought I'd see this," he told me once as we watched the children chasing butterflies. "I thought I'd die alone in that apartment." "You didn't," I said, resting my head on his shoulder. "You were never alone. And you never will be." Megan eventually joined us too. After disappearing from our parents' home, she'd reached out to me through a letter, sent not to my address, but to Peter's. She wrote pages of grief and guilt, explaining how she had spent years trying to be what our parents wanted, until it broke something inside her. The day she passed the bar exam was the same day she realized she didn't want to be their savior anymore. She left a note, packed a bag, and vanished. When she wrote to us, I knew immediately what needed to be done. Peter and I arranged to meet her secretly. We couldn't bring her to live with us at the time. Our finances were still tight, but we kept in contact. She saved up, planned carefully, and when the time was right, she moved abroad and joined us. It wasn't easy for her. New language, new culture, new expectations. She struggled at first, but she had something she never had before: choice. For the first time, Megan could choose who she wanted to be, not who Frank and Brenda wanted her to be. She tried a few different jobs, unsure of what direction to take. One night, over dinner, she looked at me and said, "I hope I meet someone as kind as your husband someday, big sis." "You will," I told her. "You're finally free." "I think I want to try something new," she added thoughtfully. "Maybe I'll teach. Or go back to school. But definitely not law." "Why not?" I asked, half joking. She smiled. "Because I'm done living someone else's dream. It's time to chase my own." Peter, listening quietly nearby, nodded proudly. "That's my girl." Now we live as a family, not the kind defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and the willingness to grow together. My husband, my kids, Megan, and Peter, we share meals, memories, and the kind of peace I never thought possible. The platform I built back home continues to grow. We recently launched a mentorship program pairing students with compassionate adult role models, and Peter became one of the first virtual mentors. He connects weekly with teenagers who feel alone, guiding them the way he once guided me. And our parents? Word reached us through extended family that they sold the house and moved into a small apartment. They'd burned through their money trying to maintain appearances and took out loans they couldn't repay. No one in the family wanted to help them anymore. Even Mr. Blake, one of Frank's old friends, stopped answering their calls. Arguments between them became frequent. They'd lost everything they once valued, except each other, and maybe even those falling apart too. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel joy. Just closure. There was something deeply calming about knowing I had no obligations left to the people who once made me feel so disposable. I didn't have to hate them anymore. I didn't have to forgive them either. I simply didn't have to think about them at all. For the first time in my life, I existed outside their shadow. I was just Hannah, a mother, a wife, a daughter to the man who chose me, a sister to the girl who finally broke free, and a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. One afternoon, Megan and I sat on the back patio watching Peter and the kids laughing as they tossed a ball back and forth. The golden sunlight painted everything with a soft glow. The air smelled like freshly watered grass and tomato vines. It was the kind of moment I used to believe belonged only in other people's lives. "I still can't believe we're here," Megan said, sipping her iced tea. "You earned it," I replied. "No," she shook her head. "You made this possible. You always protected me, even when I didn't know it. You wrote me back when I was too scared to write. You saved me." I smiled at her, a bit choked up. "I didn't save you, Megan. I just kept the door open. You walked through it." She wiped away a tear and grinned. "Well, thank you for keeping it unlocked." We both laughed. The kind of laugh that came from healing, from years of pain slowly releasing its grip. The platform I built, our platform, really had reached international recognition. We were invited to conferences, asked to speak about emotional intelligence in education. I was invited to deliver a keynote speech at a summit titled Education with Empathy, held in Copenhagen. As I stood on that stage, lights blazing, cameras flashing, I spoke about Peter. I told the audience how one man with no wealth, no job, and no formal authority gave me everything I needed to thrive: love, patience, and belief. After my speech, as people stood to applaud, I scanned the audience and found Peter, sitting in the front row, tears glistening in his eyes. I waved, and he placed his hand on his chest, smiling so wide it looked like it hurt. Later that night, I found him sitting alone on a bench outside the venue, looking up at the stars. "You're not cold?" I asked, handing him his coat. "I'm warm in every way that counts," he replied. "You've given me a life, Hannah, one I never thought I'd live to see." I sat next to him and rested my head on his shoulder. "You gave me that life first." We stayed there for a long time, saying nothing, just listening to the world breathe around us. Back at home, things were quiet. Megan was exploring new career paths. She'd applied to a design mentorship program, inspired by my journey, and was volunteering at a community center. She'd stopped seeking external validation and started listening to her own voice. Sometimes, she still struggled with guilt for how her parents used her, but each day she seemed to carry it a little more lightly. And the kids, oh, they were growing fast. Curious, bright, empathetic. Every time they hugged Peter or ran into my arms after school, I felt a silent victory bloom inside me. They were being raised with the love I had to fight to receive. And I would never let them feel invisible. One evening, as we were getting ready for dinner, I felt a familiar, gentle hand rest on my shoulder. I turned around, and there stood Peter, smiling with tired but happy eyes. "Everything all right?" he asked. I nodded, just thinking about how far we've come. He squeezed my shoulder. "You've done well, kiddo. I'm proud of you." Tears welled up in my eyes, the way they always did when Peter said those words. "I love you," I said quietly. "I love you too," he replied. The seasons passed gently in our new life, each one wrapping us in a kind of peace I never imagined possible when I was younger. There were no more yelling voices in the hallway. No more measuring my worth against my sisters. No more icy silence at the dinner table. Our home, this home we built across the ocean, was filled with laughter, art projects taped to the walls, mismatched coffee mugs, and the comforting smell of Peter's herbal tea. One weekend afternoon, while the kids were painting outside and Megan was reading under the sun, I stood in the kitchen cleaning up after lunch. The windows were open. A breeze moved through the curtains, and the house was alive with the soft sounds of joy. I paused, looking around, realizing this was everything I had once begged for: a family that cared. A life I didn't have to apologize for. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from a distant cousin, someone I hadn't heard from in years. The text was short. "Just thought you should know, Frank and Brenda are struggling. Their apartment building is going up for auction. They've asked around, but no one is helping." I stared at the message for a moment, not in shock, but in silence. The old version of me might have felt guilt, might have even considered sending help. But the woman I'd become just set the phone down and turned back toward the open window. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat outside with Megan and Peter. I shared the news. Megan raised an eyebrow. They really burned every bridge, didn't they? They chose themselves, I said. Every single time. Peter just nodded slowly. Life has a way of reflecting back what we give out. None of us said much more. We didn't need to. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't satisfaction. It was simply reality. Weeks later, I found myself standing in the garden, watching Peter teach my daughter how to prune a small tomato plant. She wore his oversized straw hat and gloves that nearly swallowed her hands. He was explaining the importance of giving space so the roots could grow freely. I stood there, smiling to myself. Later, when the sun began to set, Megan came out holding 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to me and sat on the grass. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "if someone had told me years ago that I'd be free, living in a house filled with love, and doing something meaningful, I wouldn't have believed them." I turned to her. "You made that happen." "No," she said, her eyes soft. "You opened the door first." She was right, but it didn't matter who opened the door. We were both through it now. Our platform received a major international award later that year, the Human Impact Innovator Award, for changing the lives of underrepresented youth through compassionate digital learning. I flew out to accept the award with Peter by my side. He wore a tie I had picked out, awkward and adorable in formal wear. When I stood at the podium, I held back tears and simply said, "This is for my father. Not the one who gave me his name, but the one who gave me everything else."
Peter cried.
The audience stood. That night, as we returned home, the kids ran to greet us with handmade posters that read, "Congratulations, Mom," and "We love you, Grandpa." Peter knelt down, hugging them tightly. "You're all I ever wanted," he whispered. As we tucked the kids into bed, my son asked me, "Mom, who taught you to be so strong?" I smiled. "Grandpa Peter did." And as I turned off the lights and stood there watching them sleep, I realized I had broken the cycle. I had taken every wound, every rejection, every cruel word, and turned it into a blueprint for something beautiful. I was no longer the girl they discarded. I was the woman they couldn't break. And in this little corner of the world I now called home, surrounded by my true family, I finally understood what it meant to be free. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories just like this one. Your support helps us continue bringing real, heartfelt journeys to light. Thank you for watching.